The Galactic Educational Exchange Program had been humanity's first real step into the wider universe. After 3 years of negotiations, cultural exchanges, and careful diplomatic dancing, human students were finally allowed to attend classes alongside alien species at the prestigious Zephyrian Academy on the moon of Kepler 442b. Marcus Chun had been one of the lucky few selected for the program. A 22-year-old engineering student from Earth, he had spent months preparing for life among alien classmates. The orientation materials had warned him about cultural differences, dietary restrictions, and the importance of not accidentally offending species with different social norms. What they hadn't prepared him for was how utterly terrified his classmates would be of him. The classroom buzzed with nervous energy as Marcus walked in on his third day. 27 alien students from 12 different species sat in carefully arranged pods, each designed to accommodate their unique physiologies. The Zephyrians, with their crystalline exoskeletons, chimed softly in their native tongue. The Veltar, resembling oversized mantises, clicked their mandibles in what Marcus had learned was their equivalent of whispering. The small, furry Kethari huddled together like frightened rabbits. Professor Zindura, a tall, graceful being with 4 arms and skin that shifted colors with her emotions, called for attention. Her skin currently displayed a nervous purple-green pattern. Today we will discuss theoretical physics applications in faster-than-light travel, she announced, her voice carrying the melodic quality typical of her species. Please form discussion groups of 4 students each. Marcus stood up, stretching his 6-foot frame, and immediately noticed how every alien in the room flinched. The Kethari actually squeaked in fear. He sighed internally. This had been happening since day one. He approached a group of 3 Zephyrians who had been discussing quantum mechanics in their chiming language. "Mind if I join you?" he asked politely. The lead Zephyrian, whose name was something like Christ X High, but who went by Crystal in the human translation software, looked up with what Marcus had learned to recognize as fear in their multifaceted eyes. Certainly, human Marcus," Crystal replied, their voice trembling slightly. "Please, sit wherever you feel comfortable." Marcus pulled up a chair, trying to make himself appear as non-threatening as possible. It was something he'd gotten used to over the past few days. Every movement he made seemed to put his classmates on edge. When he'd asked his human liaison about it, she'd explained that humans had developed quite a reputation in the galaxy. "Deathworlders," she'd said with a grimace. "Apparently, Earth is classified as one of the most dangerous planets in known space. Most alien species come from what they call garden worlds, places with stable climates, gentle weather patterns, and relatively few predators. Earth, with its extreme weather, natural disasters, and abundance of things that can kill you, is seen as a nightmare planet. The fact that we not only survive there, but thrive makes us intimidating to other species." Marcus had found this both amusing and frustrating. He'd spent his whole life being the kind of guy who rescued spiders instead of killing them, who helped old ladies cross streets, and who cried during sad movies. The idea that he was some kind of terrifying space warrior was absurd. "So," Marcus said, settling into his chair, "quantum tunneling effects in hyperspace. What do you think about the Veltar theory that consciousness affects the probability matrices?" The 3 Zephyrians exchanged glances, or what passed for glances among beings whose eyes were compound and multidirectional. "Well," Crystal began hesitantly, "the mathematical models do suggest that observation plays a role, but the Veltar interpretation seems to assume that consciousness is a universal constant, which our research indicates." Their discussion was interrupted by a commotion at the classroom entrance. The door, which had been sealed according to Academy protocol during class time, suddenly exploded inward in a shower of metal fragments and sparks. Through the smoke stepped a figure that made Marcus's blood run cold, though not for the same reasons as his classmates. The being was humanoid, but wrong in every detail. Its proportions were slightly off, limbs too long, joints bending in ways that shouldn't be possible. Its skin was pale to the point of translucency, showing dark veins underneath. Most disturbing were its eyes, completely black, like looking into deep space. The entire classroom erupted in panic. The Kethari screamed in their high-pitched voices. The Zephyrians' bodies flashed bright red with terror. The Veltar began clicking rapidly in their distress language. Professor Zenara's skin went white, then cycled through every color Marcus had ever seen her display. Nobody move. The intruder spoke in perfect galactic standard, its voice carrying an unnatural harmonic that seemed to vibrate in Marcus's bones. I am Shadewalker in darkness, and I have come for blood. The name sent another wave of terror through the classroom. Marcus had heard of Shadewalkers during his orientation. They were one of the galaxy's most feared species, assassins and murderers who killed for the pure joy of it. They came from a rogue planet that wandered between star systems, and their very presence meant death. What confused Marcus, however, was why everyone was looking at him. Crystal grabbed his arm with one of their crystalline appendages. "Human Marcus," they whispered urgently. "You must do something. You are the only one here who can stop it." "Me?" Marcus looked around at the terrified faces of his classmates. "Why me?" "Because you are a Deathworlder," squeaked one of the Kethari from where it was hiding under a desk. "You come from the Nightmare Planet. You must know how to fight such creatures." Marcus looked back at the Shadewalker, who had paused in the doorway, as if savoring the fear it had created. The creature's head turned slowly, scanning the room until its black eyes fixed on Marcus. "Ah," it said, and Marcus could hear the anticipation in its voice. "A human. How delightful. I was told I might find one here. Your species has such a reputation." The Shadewalker began moving into the classroom, and Marcus noticed something odd. Its movements, while graceful, seemed somehow calculated for maximum intimidation effect. The way it tilted its head, the deliberate slowness of its steps, the theatrical pause before speaking. It all seemed designed to create fear, which was when Marcus realized something that made him want to laugh out loud. The Shadewalker was about 4.5 feet tall. Marcus had been so focused on the creature's disturbing appearance and his classmates' terror that he hadn't really processed the scale. But now that he was looking properly, the fearsome galactic assassin barely came up to his chest. Moreover, now that his initial shock was wearing off, Marcus was starting to notice other details. The creature's pale skin showed what looked like old scars, but they were too neat, too symmetrical. Its movements, while unsettling, weren't actually threatening. They were performative. Even its voice, with that bone-vibrating harmonic, sounded like someone using an audio modulator. The Shadewalker had reached the center of the classroom and was now turning slowly, clearly enjoying the effect it was having on the students. "Fear me," it intoned dramatically, "for I am death incarnate, and today this classroom will run red with—" Marcus couldn't help himself. He started laughing. It wasn't a polite chuckle or a nervous giggle. It was a full, deep belly laugh that echoed through the classroom and cut through the Shadewalker's dramatic monologue like a knife through butter. The creature stopped mid-sentence, its black eyes fixing on Marcus with what looked like confusion. The terrified whimpering of the other students died down as they stared at Marcus in shock. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, wiping tears from his eyes as he tried to control his laughter. "I'm really sorry, but this is just, oh man." He gestured at the Shadewalker. "Are you seriously trying to intimidate a classroom full of college students with a Halloween costume and a voice modulator?" The Shadewalker's head tilted in what Marcus was beginning to recognize as confusion rather than menace. "Halloween costume?" "Yeah," Marcus said, standing up to his full height. The top of the Shadewalker's head barely reached his shoulders. "Look, I don't know what kind of scam you're running here, but it's not going to work on me. I've seen scarier things in haunted houses back home." Professor Zendara, her skin flickering between terror white and confusion blue, spoke up in a trembling voice. "Human Marcus, please be careful. Shadewalkers are among the most dangerous." "No," Marcus said firmly, his laughter fading into determination. "This isn't a Shadewalker. This is some kind of performance artist or con artist or something." He looked directly at the intruder. "Aren't you?" The classroom fell silent, except for the soft humming of the environmental systems. The creature that had called itself Shadewalker in Darkness stood frozen, its black eyes fixed on Marcus with an expression that was definitely not the confident menace it had displayed moments before. And, in that silence, Marcus began to understand something about the galaxy he'd entered, something about fear and reputation and the power of perspective that the orientation materials had never covered. The silence stretched for several heartbeats before Marcus took a step forward. The fake Shadewalker immediately took 2 steps back, which confirmed Marcus's suspicions entirely. "Yeah, that's what I thought," Marcus said, his voice calm but carrying the authority he'd learned from years of dealing with bullies back on Earth. Real predators don't back down when someone stands up to them. They either attack or hold their ground. You, my friend, are neither. The creature's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly, and Marcus caught what looked like relief flickering across its features before it tried to reassert its menacing pose. "You dare mock the darkness incarnate?" The fake Shadewalker tried again, but the voice modulator couldn't hide the uncertainty creeping into its tone. Marcus looked around at his classmates, who were watching this exchange with a mixture of terror and confusion. Crystal was still gripping the edge of their desk, so hard that small stress fractures were appearing in their crystalline appendages. "Okay, everyone," Marcus said, addressing the class. "I need you to trust me for a minute here. This person is not a Shadewalker. Watch." He turned back to the intruder and crossed his arms. "Let me guess. You're probably a student here, maybe someone who's been struggling with grades or social acceptance. You figured out that everyone in the galaxy is terrified of these Shadewalker beings, so you decided to dress up like one and cause some chaos. Maybe get classes canceled. Maybe just enjoy scaring people for once instead of being the one who's scared." The fake Shadewalker's mouth opened slightly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of perfectly ordinary teeth, not the razor-sharp fangs that real Shadewalkers were supposed to have according to the databases. The pale skin is just makeup, probably something designed for theatrical use. The scars are prosthetics. I can see the adhesive lines from here. The weird joint movements are because you're wearing some kind of exoskeleton under your clothes to change your proportions. And that voice modulator is probably built into that collar you're wearing. Marcus took another step forward, and again the creature backed away. "But here's what really gives you away. You're trying way too hard. Real predators don't need to announce that they're death incarnate. They don't give dramatic speeches. They just act." Professor Zendara's skin had shifted to a puzzled orange. "But, human Marcus, how can you be certain? Shadewalkers are legendary for their stealth and killing ability. The database clearly states the database was written by people who've never actually encountered one." Marcus interrupted gently. "They're writing about legends and stories. But I've encountered real predators, real dangerous situations. This isn't one of them." He gestured at the fake Shadewalker, who was now definitely looking more confused than menacing. "Look at the body language. Real confidence doesn't need all this theatrical posturing. Real danger doesn't pause to make sure everyone is properly terrified before acting." One of the Veltar students, a female named Texera, clicked her mandibles nervously. "But, human Marcus, your species is known for its combat prowess. Perhaps what seems obvious to a Deathworlder is not so clear to those of us from more peaceful worlds." Marcus paused at that, considering. It was true that his perspective was shaped by growing up on Earth, where humans had evolved alongside countless predators and in environments that could kill them in dozens of creative ways. What seemed obvious to him about body language and threat assessment might not be clear to species that had never needed to develop those instincts. "Okay," he said, "let me break it down differently. Can anyone tell me what they know about real Shadewalker physiology?" Crystal raised one crystalline appendage hesitantly. "The records indicate they are approximately 7 feet tall, with elongated limbs and enhanced musculature designed for stealth and rapid movement." Marcus nodded and gestured at their intruder. "This person is maybe 4'6", and I can see the padding under their costume where they're trying to fake muscle mass. The proportions are all wrong. Kexera clicked thoughtfully. The databases also mentioned their distinctive black eyes, which are said to be completely pupilless and capable of seeing in complete darkness. Those are contact lenses, Marcus said confidently. You can see the edges where they don't quite match the natural eye curve. Plus, they're blinking way too much. Someone who actually sees in the dark wouldn't need to blink constantly to adjust to our classroom lighting. The fake Shadewalker had gone very still during this analysis, and Marcus could see sweat beading on what parts of skin were visible beneath the makeup. Most importantly, Marcus continued, real Shadewalkers supposedly kill for pleasure, right? They're described as being unable to resist spilling blood when they encounter potential victims. But this person has been in our classroom for several minutes now, had every opportunity to attack, and instead has been giving speeches and posing dramatically. The understanding began to dawn on some of his classmates' faces. The Kethari slowly began emerging from under their desks, though they still kept their distance. Marcus looked directly at the intruder. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to drop the act, remove that voice modulator, and tell us who you really are and what you really want. Because right now, you're probably looking at charges for breaking and entering destruction of Academy property and terrorizing fellow students. But if you cooperate, maybe we can figure out what's actually going on and help you solve it properly. The fake Shadewalker stood frozen for a long moment, its black contact-covered eyes darting between Marcus and the classroom full of students who were now looking more curious than terrified. Finally, with emotion that was defeated rather than dramatic, the intruder reached up and removed the collar device. When it spoke again, its voice was entirely different, younger, uncertain, and definitely not the voice of a galactic assassin. I just wanted them to notice me, the person said, and Marcus could hear that it was actually quite young, probably not much older than himself. The fake Shadewalker reached up with trembling hands and began pulling off the contact lenses, revealing perfectly ordinary brown eyes underneath. Then came the prosthetic scars, peeling away to show unmarked skin beneath. The pale makeup smeared as tears began to cut tracks through it. I just wanted to be important for once, the person continued, voice breaking. Everyone here is so smart, so accomplished. I'm barely passing my classes. No one knows my name. No one cares if I'm here or not. Professor Zendara's skin had shifted to a sympathetic purple. Young one, what is your name? Which program are you enrolled in? Zix, the person said quietly. Zix Arenal. I'm in the Xenobiology program, 3rd year. I sit in the back of every class, and no one has ever spoken to me. Marcus felt a pang of recognition. He'd known students like this back on Earth, smart, capable people who somehow fell through the social cracks and became invisible. The only difference was that on Earth, a desperate bid for attention usually involved pulling fire alarms or starting fights, not dressing up as a legendary galactic assassin. Zixarinal, Marcus said gently. What species are you? Without all the costume, I mean. Zix pulled off what Marcus now realized was a full-head prosthetic, revealing a small, delicate humanoid face with large golden eyes and pale blue skin marked with intricate natural patterns. I'm NYDHRE, Zix said. We're known for being peaceful, quiet, invisible. Marcus had read about the NYTHRE during his orientation. They were one of the galaxy's most pacifistic species, originally from a world with no predators and very little conflict. They were renowned for their gentle nature and their ability to go unnoticed, a trait that had originally evolved as a defense mechanism, but now often left them overlooked in more dynamic social environments. And you thought if you couldn't get attention for being yourself, you'd get it by being the most terrifying thing you could think of, Marcus said with understanding. Zix nodded miserably. I researched it all. Shadewalkers are supposed to be the most feared beings in the galaxy. I thought if I could make everyone think I was dangerous, they'd finally pay attention to me. Kexera clicked softly. But why choose to frighten us? There are many other ways to gain attention that don't involve making your fellow students fear for their lives. Because being feared felt better than being ignored, Zix said simply. For a few minutes, I was the most important person in the room. Everyone was looking at me. Everyone was reacting to me. Marcus felt something click into place in his understanding of galactic society. On Earth, attention-seeking behavior usually involved being louder, bigger, more aggressive. But in a galaxy where most species had evolved on peaceful worlds, where actual violence was rare and the concept of predation was largely theoretical, the ultimate attention-getter would indeed be pretending to be something from everyone's worst nightmares. "Zix," he said carefully, "have you considered that maybe the problem isn't that you're invisible, but that you're trying to get attention in ways that don't match who you actually are?" The young and white EHRE looked up at him with those large golden eyes. "What do you mean?" Marcus gestured around the classroom. "Look around you right now. Really look. Everyone here is paying attention to you. Everyone here is concerned about you. Not because you scared them, but because they want to understand what's wrong and how to help." And it was true. Crystal had moved closer, their crystalline features showing concern rather than fear. The Kethari had gathered in a small group, whispering among themselves, but watching Zix with worried expressions. Even Professor Zendura had approached, her skin displaying the warm gold colors that indicated compassion among her species. "You already have their attention," Marcus continued. "The question is, what are you going to do with it?" Zix looked around the classroom with wonder, as if seeing their fellow students clearly for the first time. The golden eyes that had been hidden behind black contacts were actually quite beautiful, Marcus noted, and the natural patterns on their blue skin were intricate and unique. I never thought about it that way," Zix said quietly. Professor Zendara approached slowly, her skin now a warm, maternal gold. "Zix Arenal, may I ask why you felt invisible in your classes? Your academic record shows consistent performance, and your research proposals have always been thoughtful." Zix's shoulders slumped. "Because no one ever talks to me. During group projects, I get paired with whoever is left over, and they usually just divide up the work and do their parts separately. During discussions, if I raise my hand, professors call on other students first. In the dining hall, I sit alone." Marcus felt a familiar sting of recognition. He'd seen this dynamic countless times back on Earth, though it usually played out differently there. But the core problem was universal. Someone falling through the social cracks, not because they weren't worthy of attention, but because they'd gotten caught in a cycle where being overlooked made them withdraw, which made them easier to overlook, which made them withdraw further. "Have you considered," Marcus said gently, "that maybe some of your classmates feel the same way?" Crystal chimed softly, their crystalline body catching the classroom lights. "Human Marcus is correct. I often feel uncertain about approaching others for conversation. My species' communication style is quite different from most others here." One of the Kethari, a small being with russet-colored fur, spoke up in their squeaky voice. "I have wanted to ask Zix Arenal about their research several times. Your project on symbiotic relationships in low-energy ecosystems was fascinating, but I was unsure if it would be welcome conversation." Zix's eyes widened. "Oh, you read my research proposal?" "Of course," the Kethari replied. "It was posted on the academic network. Many of us read each other's work, but we do not always know how to begin discussions about it." Kexera clicked her mandibles in agreement. The social dynamics of multi-species environments are complex. Many of us err on the side of caution rather than risk causing offense through cultural misunderstanding. Marcus began to see the bigger picture. In this diverse academic environment, where dozens of species with radically different social norms were trying to coexist, everyone was being extra careful not to step on anyone else's metaphorical toes. The result was a kind of social paralysis where genuine connection became difficult. So basically, Marcus said, everyone here wants to connect with each other, but nobody knows how to make the first move because you're all afraid of accidentally being rude or inappropriate. A chorus of agreement rose from around the classroom. Chimes from the Zephyrians, clicks from the Veltar, squeaks from the Kethari, and various other sounds of acknowledgement from species Marcus was still learning to identify. Professor Zendara's skin had shifted to a thoughtful blue-green. "This is a problem I have observed in many multi-species educational environments. The desire to be culturally sensitive sometimes creates barriers to authentic interaction. Marcus looked at Zix, who was still standing in the center of the classroom, but now seemed small and vulnerable rather than threatening. Zix, what if I told you that you being in white HRE isn't what makes you invisible? It's what could make you invaluable. I don't understand, Zix said. Your people's natural ability to go unnoticed, to observe without being observed, that's not a weakness in a research environment. That's a superpower. You've probably noticed things about social dynamics, about how different species interact, that none of the rest of us have picked up on because we're too busy being part of those interactions. Marcus began pacing slightly as the idea developed. Back on Earth, we have a saying, it's quiet ones you have to watch. Not because they're dangerous, but because they're usually the ones who see everything that everyone else misses. Crystal chimed with interest. This is an intriguing perspective. Zix Arenal, you have been observing our class dynamics for 3 years. What patterns have you noticed that we might not see ourselves? Zix hesitated, then seemed to gather courage. Well, actually, yes. I have noticed quite a lot. Their voice grew stronger as they continued. For instance, Texera, your people are natural teachers, but you hold back from sharing knowledge because you're afraid others will think you're being condescending. And Crystal, your species processes information incredibly quickly, but you slow down your responses because you think others will feel inadequate if you answer too fast. Texera's mandibles clicked in surprise. That is remarkably accurate. And the Kethari, Zix continued, warming to their subject. You have insights that could revolutionize several fields of study, but you phrase them as questions instead of statements because your cultural training tells you to be humble. But the result is that professors think you're confused instead of brilliant. The russet-furred Kethari's ears perked up. You have been paying attention to our academic contributions? I pay attention to everything, Zix said, and for the first time, they sounded proud of this trait rather than ashamed. It's what my people do. We see the patterns that others miss because they're too busy being part of them. Marcus grinned, and that, right there, is why you're not invisible, you're observant. There's a huge difference. Professor Zindara's skin had shifted to an excited yellow. Zix Arenal, would you be interested in serving as a social dynamics consultant for our classroom? Your observations could help us create a more effective learning environment for all species represented here. Zix looked stunned. You want my input on how to improve the class? Absolutely, the professor replied. Multi-species education is still a developing field. We need observers who can identify the subtle barriers to communication that we might not recognize ourselves. Marcus watched as something transformed in Zix's posture. The defeated slump was replaced by straight shoulders and lifted chin. The young NYDHRE was discovering that their perceived weakness was actually a unique strength. I have actually been keeping notes, Zix admitted shyly. Observations about interaction patterns, communication effectiveness across species barriers, optimal group compositions for collaborative projects. Notes? Crystal chimed with excitement. You have data? Extensive data, Zix confirmed, pulling out a small recording device. I've been documenting social interactions for analysis. Originally, it was just because I was lonely and trying to understand why I couldn't connect with anyone. But it became fascinating from a research perspective. Texera clicked rapidly with excitement. This could be groundbreaking research. Social dynamics in multi-species academic environments is an understudied field. Marcus felt a warm satisfaction watching Zix transform from a desperate, attention-seeking imposter into someone discovering their own unique value. But there was still one more thing that needed to be addressed. Zix, he said gently, there's still the matter of the broken door and the terror you caused. That can't just be ignored. The young NYTHR's face fell. I know. I'll accept whatever punishment. I'm not talking about punishment, Marcus interrupted. I'm talking about making things right. You caused damage and scared people. How do you think you should handle that? Zix looked around at the faces of their classmates, all of whom were now watching with interest rather than fear. I should apologize. Really apologize, not just say sorry. And I should fix the door I broke. And maybe they paused, thinking, maybe I should use what I've learned about social dynamics to help make sure other students don't feel as isolated as I did. Professor Zindara's skin displayed approval patterns. Those sound like excellent first steps. I think we can work with Academy administration to turn this incident into a learning opportunity rather than a disciplinary matter. And Crystal added, their chimes taking on an enthusiastic tone, perhaps we could form a study group to discuss Zixarinol's research. I believe many of us would benefit from better understanding how to communicate across species barriers. The Kethari squeaked with agreement. Yes, and Zixarinol could teach us how to observe social patterns more effectively. Marcus watched as connections began forming around the classroom. What had started as a terror-filled encounter with a fake assassin was turning into something much more valuable, a community of students who were finally learning to see each other clearly. You know what the funny thing is? Marcus said to Zix as the other students began chattering excitedly about study groups and research collaboration. You got exactly what you wanted. Everyone in this room knows your name now, everyone is paying attention to you, and everyone sees you as important. You just had to stop pretending to be something you weren't and start being proud of what you actually are. Zix smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from them. I understand now why humans have such a reputation in the galaxy. Not because you're scary, but because you see through pretenses. You look at what actually is instead of what people are pretending to be. Marcus laughed. Well, growing up on a world where everything is trying to kill you does teach you to quickly identify real threats from fake ones. But more than that, it teaches you that everyone has survival skills. They're just not always the ones you expect. Your skill happens to be observation and pattern recognition. That's just as valuable as physical strength, maybe more so. As the class period drew to a close, students began gathering around Zix, introducing themselves properly for the first time and asking questions about their research. The young and white HRE looked overwhelmed but happy, finally experiencing the genuine attention and connection they had been craving. Professor Zindara approached Marcus as the other students chatted. Thank you, Human Marcus. Your intervention probably prevented a much more serious situation. No problem, Marcus replied. Although I have to ask, is this kind of thing common in multi-species environments? Students feeling so isolated that they resort to this. The professor's skin displayed thoughtful patterns, more common than we would like to admit. Integration is still a challenge for galactic society. Perhaps your people's directness is exactly what we need more of. Marcus smiled. Well, if you ever need a human perspective on social dynamics, let me know. Apparently being from a death world gives you some useful insights into reading people. As they left the classroom together, a group now rather than a collection of isolated individuals, Marcus reflected on what had happened. He'd come to the academy expecting to learn about alien technology and advanced physics. Instead, he was learning about the universal nature of loneliness and the power of being seen for who you really are. The galaxy was full of different species with different strengths, but some needs were apparently universal. And sometimes the best way to handle a crisis wasn't with force or fear, but with laughter and the simple recognition that everyone just wanted to belong somewhere. The fake assassin had failed in their mission of terror, but they'd succeeded in bringing a classroom together. And that, Marcus thought, was probably a much better outcome than anyone could have planned.